The New Revised Standard Version, second letter of John. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in the truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. I was overjoyed to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we have been commanded by the Father. But now, dear lady, I ask you, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but one we have had from the beginning. Let us love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard it from the beginning. You must walk in it. Many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Be on your guard, so that you do not lose what we have worked for, but may receive a full reward. Everyone who does not abide in the teaching of Christ, but goes beyond it, does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. Do not receive into the house or welcome anyone who comes to you and does not bring this teaching. For to welcome is to participate in the evil deeds of such a person. Although I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk with you face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister send you their greetings.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was wonderful, wonderfully read. If they ever make the movie of 2 John, you get the part. Morning. How are you doing? All right? Sleep well? Good, good. I think I've drunk about a gallon of coffee and eaten my own body weight in boiled sweets already. So it's day 2 of the conference. It's been really good to be with you and get to know you. Really good things are happening in this diocese. It's been a joy to hear about it. So we started yesterday by looking at some of the themes and the context of John's letters, and particularly looking at 1 John under the headings of know, live, and love. And I do encourage you to read the themes that we've written up on the board there. There's some great song lyrics in there, so do have a chance to look at those during the day. And today we come to 2 John. John the elder wrote his second letter to the elect lady and her children. This probably wasn't an actual person, but more likely a personification of a set of local churches. We're used to hearing the church spoken about as she, aren't we, echoing the bride of Christ, and maybe that's the kind of imagery that John is drawing on here. And so he addresses himself to the chosen lady, whom he loves in the truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. Do you think he's trying to emphasize something here in the first verse? The word truth comes 4 times in the greeting alone. As we saw yesterday, John's letters were written to churches in response to false teachers, antichrists, deceivers, those who had been travelling the road as kind of itinerant missionaries and spreading deception about the nature of Jesus Christ, and particularly about his bodily incarnation. And here, in the second letter, John follows up his first with a kind of practical strategy for dealing with heretics. So if you need a practical strategy for dealing with heretics, Bishop, here it is. And he urges his readers not to offer heretics welcome and hospitality. It is slightly ironic that here in 2 John, he discourages the church from doing exactly what he commends Gaius for doing in 3 John, offering hospitality to visiting preachers. And we'll hear more about that tomorrow. But there is a crucial difference. The difference is that they should welcome those who walk in the truth and who abide in the teaching of Christ, and they should not welcome those who don't. John can sound a bit black and white to our modern ears. You're either in or you're out. You're either walking in light or you're walking in darkness. You either have God or you don't have God. It can sound a bit uninclusive. But I want us to notice the way that John speaks about truth. Often in the church, we get obsessed with the limits of truth, with boundaries, with lines, with stepping over them and crossing them, and Rubicons and lines in the sand. But John doesn't talk about boundaries so much as about what is at the centre, what we're gathered around, what keeps us in rather than what shuts us out. So notice the language here. Truth is something that abides in us and which will be with us and in which we walk. It doesn't seem to be something that has easily discernible edges. Now, do not hear me wrong. I'm not advocating a relativist position. I'm not saying that John didn't think the truth had limits. That would be quite wrong and against the spirit in which John writes. If the truth didn't have limits, then how can there be false teachers or antichrists or those who are not in the truth? There is truth and there is falsehood. But truth is something that contains us, not something we contain. Abiding in the truth is not just about getting the facts right. It is that, but it goes deeper too. Tom Wright, you might have noticed I really like Tom Wright's commentary on the John's letters. He says this: truth is something that goes down deep and spreads out wide. It's what happens when humans, redeemed in the Messiah and renewed by the Spirit, think, speak, and act in a way which corresponds to God's plan to renew the whole creation, and indeed which sets that renewal will forward in whatever way they are called to do. I'll just give you a moment to read that and think about it. Truth is a way of life, not simply a set of propositions. And one of the hallmarks of this truth, as in John's first letter, is the command to love. So now, dear lady, I ask you, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but one we have had from the beginning. Let us love one another. That's verse 5. Truth and love. And to quote the great Nick Kershaw, what is love anyway? Love is an undervalued currency in our climate. I don't think we're very sure about what love looks like today. Too often we make the mistake of thinking that loving someone means agreeing with everything they say and do. Not challenging, but condoning every action, not talking about the rightness or the wrongness of anything. Love has come to mean never being able to express a difference of opinion or to challenge anyone. And if that is love, then I have to say I have loved my husband and children very poorly over the years. Love is not the same as tolerance. Tolerance is better than intolerance, but tolerance isn't really what John is talking about here. John's talking about love. So if not that, then what does it look like for Christians to love each other? Well, we have a very clear answer in verse 6. And this is love, that we walk according to the commandments. This is the commandment, just as you've heard it from the beginning. You must walk in it. This is what love looks like, says John. It looks like together obeying and walking in the ancient commandments of God. To love each other and to walk together in God's commandments. And to reject those who do not do that also. You're not supposed to tolerate, says John, those who are opposed to the truth, those who are deceivers and antichrists. I told you this was difficult stuff, and at this point you do need to remember again that it was the planning group that asked for 1, 2 and 3, John. This letter is about the relationship between truth and love, and both are important. It's really easy, isn't it, to focus on one or the other and to stereotype both in our church. We're a church that stands on the truth. We're a church that loves everyone. I wonder which is more important to you, truth or love? If I were to have a scale of sort of 10 is love and 1 is truth, where would you put yourself on that scale? In fact, I hope that as I've asked you to do that, you found that really difficult, because actually that's a wrong thing to ask you to do. Truth and love are not at opposite ends of the scale. Chris Green, in his book, The Message of the Church, says this: both truth and love are God's eternal and perfect character. So truth without love would become a tyrannous idol, and love without truth, a blasphemous lie. We must hold truth and love together. As 1 John 1 says, we love in the truth. Love for our fellow Christians is called out of us by the truth. There's a really strong scriptural relationship between truth and love. 1 Corinthians 13:6 says, love doesn't rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. Ephesians 4:15, speaking the truth in love, we're to grow up in all aspects into him, who is the head, even Christ. And then 2 Timothy 2:24 speaks of the qualities of a leader. The Lord's servant mustn't be quarrelsome, but kindly to everyone, an apt teacher, patient, correcting opponents with gentleness. And then he says, God may perhaps grant that they will repent and come to know the truth, those to whom the teacher speaks. So truth shapes how we love, and love points to the truth. In fact, John's letter here tells us that the relationship between truth and love isn't just not contradictory, it's causatory. We need to love each other because of heresies. Let me explain. If you are reading the NRSV translation, as I have been, and which we heard now, there is a missing word. Shock horror. If you read verse 6 and 7, as it is there, it says this: and this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you've heard it from the beginning. You must walk in it. Many deceivers have gone out into the world. There's a missing word. What it actually says in Greek is this: this is the commandment, just as you've heard it from the beginning. You must walk in it. For, hoti. There's a word there that the NRSV doesn't translate. Does anybody have a translation where it does have for or because in? Yeah, a few people. Yours is the more accurate. For, because many deceivers have gone out into the world. We need to love each other. Why? Because there are deceivers in the world. That changes the way these verses read, doesn't it? Love, in this sense of walking together in the commandments, is actually an antidote to heresy. We must love each other because there are deceivers. Truth and love together stand and protect us against deception. Now, we saw yesterday that these deceivers were most likely those who are preaching a version of Christianity that was very close, but had the subtle difference of saying that we're not saved through the blood of Jesus on the cross. We're not saved through the free will gift of God's grace, but we're saved through superior knowledge. Actually, it was a very uninclusive heresy. It was a very unloving heresy, which saw there being two types of Christian. But it probably sounded quite plausible. It probably sounded almost right to the churches. The need to get our doctrine of Jesus Christ right is so important. And I hope you can see this picture. This really brought it home to me. This is a bumper sticker. If Jesus had a gun, he would be alive today. How many ways is that wrong? Let's put up our hands. The need to get a correct doctrine of Christ. And so John warns them to do two things. Number one, verse 8, be on your guard. Watch yourself. These heretics sound very plausible. It's insidious. It was very easy to welcome. And number two, don't offer the false preachers a platform. Don't receive into the house or welcome anyone who comes to you and doesn't bring this teaching, for to welcome is to participate in the evil deeds of such a person. Now, hang on. This all sounds a bit harsh. Aren't we meant to welcome everyone? Aren't we meant to be all about hospitality as Christians? Does this mean that I can't share a cup of tea with my Muslim neighbours or go to the pub with atheists? It's not the kind of thing that John is talking about here. Hospitality in his culture carried a very specific meaning. In the days before travel lodges or Airbnb, to welcome someone was to endorse their message. Offering hospitality was almost a sacred action. So Melina defends hospitality in this context like this. It's the process by means of which an outsider's status is changed from stranger to guest. Jesus placed hospitality at the core of many of his stories and his parables. And when he sent his disciples out to preach the good news, he gave them some very specific instructions about how to enter a house. There were very strict rules and protocols surrounding the practice of hospitality. So to welcome a person was to accept their views, such that it was necessary, if you wanted to stay with someone, to have a letter of commendation. And we'll see a bit more about that tomorrow in 3 John. So this is about official, structural hospitality. We're not talking about showing kindness to an unbelieving neighbour, but about church elders endorsing a gospel of falsehood. To extend hospitality to teachers who don't conform to apostolic teaching is to assent to their version of the truth. Verse 11, for to welcome is to participate in the evil deeds of such a person. It's not simply being kind and sharing life together. It's offering a speaking platform to a dodgy preacher. It's refusing to openly condemn a white supremacist march. It's making formal alliances with groups who actively oppose all that the gospel stands for. We live with those whose convictions differ from our own, but John warns us to be wary of formally embracing those who teach a different gospel. So, you will be sitting there thinking, well, that's fine, but how do we determine who is a brother or sister to be loved and who is a false teacher to be rejected? How do we decide the limits of hospitality? That seems to be the crux of the matter in many of our debates in the church at the moment, although we don't use the word evil on the floor of General Synod, or not very often anyway. Are our disagreements containable within the emphases of acceptable Christian orthodoxy, or do we disagree over a core matter? Remember that the heretical teaching John was warning about was those who said that Jesus didn't appear bodily. It was a denial of the importance of the body, the incarnation, and the cross of Christ. Who are the heretics today? Who are the deceivers? Whose deeds are evil? And I'm deliberately using the provocative language that John uses. I can't help thinking that we often look in the wrong direction for our heresies. I have a guilty confession, and that is that I really love very rubbish action adventure films. The rubbisher, the better. So the other day, I was delighted to find myself watching Kong Skull Island. Put your hand up if you have seen this excellent film. 1 or 2 discerning people. Well done. Now, this is a a highly accurate and entirely plausible account of some troops who go to a lost and mysterious island where they encounter a 30-metre tall monkey, Kong, who downs some of their helicopters and generally romps around roaring and beating his chest. And they set out to try and kill the monkey, believing that Kong is the enemy. But slowly, through a series of highly nuanced and subtle acting performances, where several very realistic encounters occur, one of them with blood-sucking spiders the size of a house, they realise that Kong, in fact, is not the enemy after all. The real enemy is a set of rabid two-legged lizards that live in caves under the ground and emerge at regular intervals to pick off and tear limb from limb unsuspecting film heroes, especially those who are not Tom Hiddleston or Samuel L. Jackson. So far from being the enemy, Kong is actually the only one who has been hitherto keeping the monstrous reptiles in check. But they realise a bit too late, and out come the lizards. This excellent motion picture caused me to theologically reflect on this question. Who is our enemy as the church today? Really? If we are a church, we will have enemies. Jesus promised that. But are we focusing too easily on the blatantly obvious issues, the 30-foot monkeys, whilst allowing the smaller, more subtle, and much more dangerous lizards to gain a foothold? Now, because I value my life and my reputation, I am not going to risk at this point naming which I would consider to be monkey issues and which I would class as lizards. You will have your own view about what you think about that, and if you buy me a drink in the bar later, I might be persuaded to talk some more. But I wonder, for all of us, shall we reflect as we go through the day? In my context, what are the 30-foot monkeys and what are the two-legged lizards? By the way, don't say this to anyone who wasn't in the conference. They won't understand what you're talking about. I think John would warn us to look especially at those who go beyond the teaching of Christ, as it says in verse 9. Those who run ahead with new ideas rather than walking faithfully in line with the old commandments. Those who say, let's do it like this, in a way that no one has ever thought about in the history of the Christian church ever. To John. It's a letter that's hard to read and still harder to interpret for our modern context, but which is a compelling picture of a church leader defining the limits of both orthodoxy and orthopraxy in the context of love. John says that he would have liked to have written more, but he would rather not use paper and ink. Right at the end of this letter is a reminder of what the whole thing is about. That love is better expressed face-to-face than in letters or emails or position papers or any kind of long-distance communication. In such a time as this, in this day ahead, when we can be together face-to-face, even with our differences, as brothers and sisters in Christ, may our joy, like John's, be complete. Have a very good day.